Good evening again. My name is Monica Negrilla. I'm the Human Services Manager here at the City of Issaquah. I am also the staff liaison to the Equity Board, and I lead the community-facing equity initiatives here in our city. So it is my pleasure and honor to kick off this meeting tonight and our event. And so before I introduce our special guests for the evening, I just want to start with just a few technical details. For those of you who might not be familiar with WebEx meetings and events, you are able to use the chat feature that you can find in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can ask questions via chat during the session, and our panelists will pause at certain times to answer those questions. Also, if you have any other technical issues, certainly you can use the chat feature. You also have another feature. You can raise your hand if you have difficulties with the chat. The raise hand virtual feature, you can find that still in the right-hand side of your screen. Once you open the participant panel, it's kind of like in the middle of the screen there for you. Otherwise, on your screen tonight, you will see the panelists and those who participate in the event. So I think that covers most of the technical details. I just want to also mention that the event is recorded and it's going to be available later for viewing for those who are not able to attend or those who would like to go back for some interesting facts and information. And so with that, I also just want to note that we are really, really grateful for bringing community conversations and having an opportunity to bring events like this where we learn from one another and we have an opportunity to build community. And with that, we always want to encourage everyone and to remind everyone to keep comments positive and take this as an opportunity to really learn, to foster authentic and meaningful conversations and really be supportive of one another. And so with that, I would like to invite representing City Council, our Deputy Council President, Zach Hall, to make some opening remarks for our event. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me, Monica. I guess just to kick everything off, hey everybody, I'm Zach Hall. Like Monica said, I'm a city council member here in Issaquah. Just wanted to welcome you all to this special event and thank the members of the city's equity board and their partners in the community for their work and their commitment to lifting queer voices here in Issaquah. Just by way of some background, the equity board was established last year with a couple of goals in mind. One, to support and lift up the voices of diverse communities, and two, to advise the mayor, the city council, and various city departments on items related to equity, which of course intersects so much with what government does and what government should do. As a city council member myself, I'm so grateful for this group and their dedication to the vision that we share for in Issaquah, where everyone feels safe and respected and seen and valued. And as an openly gay man myself, who grew up here in Issaquah, who never felt that sense of, safety or sense of comfort to come out in my high school years about 10 years ago now, I'm incredibly moved and just so happy that the Equity Board has created this space for us to celebrate and learn and set a renewed tone focused on the value of diversity and inclusion, both for our residents who want to learn more about Pride Month and queer communities, but also for our youth who may be struggling with their own identities like I did. So this just means so much to me. I really appreciate you all being here. And to that end, happy Pride Month. I'm really excited to hear from our panelists and learn more about the many contributions and achievements of the LGBTQIA plus community and how we can do our part to celebrate and support Issaquah's diversity. So welcome, and with that, thanks so much for having me, and I'll pass the mic back to Monica or to Ray or whoever's up first.
Thank you so much, Deputy Council President. We so appreciate having you with us tonight. Thank you. And yes, with that, next I would love to pass on to the microphone to our Equity Board member and chair of our newly formed Community Engagement Committee, part of the Equity Board, Ray Manahan. And so we are so honored to have Ray with us tonight as the facilitator of this event and our host. Such a pleasure working with Ray. You might have read in the information available on the event description, but I'm so looking forward to hearing more about Ray's story here in Issaquah, but also just in general. I know that Jeff is raising with his husband, Jeff, their beautiful teenage daughter here in the area have been together for the past 20 years and have a teenage daughter here in Issaquah High School. So looking forward to hearing more about that. And I know that recently moved from Seattle and you're working in the healthcare administration for many years. And more newly, since we created the Equity Board, you are on our Equity Board, serving the community in many ways. And we are just so honored to have you and work with you. So thank you so much, Ray. I'm giving the mic to you, and have a wonderful evening with the event. I'm just excited. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Monica. And it is a tremendous honor and a pleasure. And I'm really excited to be acting as your host this evening. So as Monica mentioned, I'm part of we're fairly new. The Equity Board was established at our first meeting, I believe, in the fall, right around October. But it took months and months of planning, months and months of strategy with the mayor and the city council, like Deputy Council Member Hall, to really understand the need for an equity board to serve our community. So I, along with others, are trying to establish the right strategy to make sure that we address the needs of our community from an equity lens. Within the Equity Board, we have committees that are formed, and I have the great pleasure of starting a new committee that reports up to the Equity Board, and it's called the Community Engagement Committee, and also very foundational. But what our focus is going to be with this committee is really connecting with not only the businesses around the Issaquah area, but to hear the voices of the residences too. So as that starts to get up and running, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot here just from listening to our speakers and some of the questions from our attendees, our audience, that might even help us incorporate some of this into this strategy. So I'm really looking forward to using this as a learning opportunity. Yeah, I moved out here, as Monica mentioned, just a couple years ago. So my husband Jeff and I have been together for 20 plus years, and we got married at Seattle City Hall right around 2011 when marriage equality was legal, supported by the city. And I remember going into the City Hall, and it was such an amazing event. Our daughter, we adopted her when she was 5 days old. I'm smiling because so many memories. Now she's in high school, so we get the great pleasure of raising this beautiful girl. But that's a brief intro to me, and I want to cut right into this wonderful group of individuals who have volunteered to be our panel members. So I'm going to just call them out individually, but I would really, as I call them out and just connect to their organization, to allow them to just share the work that they do within their organization, because we want to use this again as a learning opportunity to learn about organizations that serve the LGBTQ plus community. And I think the organizations that they represent do some amazing work. So as I introduce them one by one, I would like them to share a little bit about themselves, their background, but also again, share the tremendous work that you do within your community. So if I may, I'm going to start with Astro Pittman. Astro, welcome. It is such a great pleasure to have you here. And Astro represents Lambert House. So if we could just take a few minutes, and I'm going to continue going down the list, but I want to start with Astro.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Ray, and hello to everyone who has joined us this evening. We're so glad that you took some time out of your evening to come hang out with us. So, as Ray said, my name is Astro Pittman. I use they, them pronouns, and I work at Lambert House as a facilitator, coordinator, and outreach person. I'm also the founder of Transgender Day of Remembrance in Seattle. We are in our 5th year of that. I'm an award-winning journalist who writes about LGBTQ issues, and I'm also a substance use disorder counselor at a different job where I also get to work with LGBTQ plus young people who are struggling with substance use disorders and mental health challenges.
Thank you, Astro. And also joining us this evening is Mitch Hunter. Mitch is representing Gen Pride, which is an organization that's an advocate for the needs of our older rainbow community. So Mitch, welcome. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. I really appreciate the offer to be here, and I want to thank everybody who's hanging out with us tonight. Hopefully we'll get a chance to find out more about what you think as well. So it'll be a great time to spend here. I am the training manager at Gen Pride. We do work and provide resources for the Two-Spirit LGBTQIA plus community as we are graying, I think, maybe. So we kind of coined the term Rainbow Elders after working with several different senior centers around and having the elders themselves having issues with all the letters. And so we made agreements that we just talk casually as Rainbow Elders, and it seems to have kind of hit a spot. I come here, this is my 2nd year in working with Gen Pride, and I come here by way of consulting and training on transgender and non-binary health issues with area hospitals, clinics, also just talking to businesses and corporations in terms of helping them with an inclusion and bringing folks into their organizations, having more welcoming and inclusive policies. I spent a couple of years on the LGBT Commission for the city of Seattle before they added the Q, and was part of helping to bring about our gender neutral restroom policies. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you again for being here with us. Also on our panel, we have Joe Bento from GLSEN. And GLSEN is an organization that's an advocate for a safe learning environment, so focused on education, K through 12. So welcome, Joe, and it's a pleasure to have you with us too.
Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for being here this evening to watch this presentation. GLSEN does a lot of different work around the nation. We're a chapter of the national organization, and a lot of the work that we do in Washington focuses on student supports and educator supports in schools. So we want to make sure that students have resources to have a safe environment, and so they can do activities with their student clubs. Usually they're called GSAs, a Gender Sexuality Alliance, or SAGA, Sexuality and Gender Alliance, depending on the schools or whatever rendition that the schools call them. We also provide professional development for educators so that educators will have the tools in order to create safe classroom environments or offices or hallways for all students that go to their school, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We have a bunch of other programs that we do as well, including our Rainbow Library program, our professional development program, and we also have a student council that we call our SHINE team, which is middle school and high school students who also want to do some work supporting their peers around the state. As for myself, I use he, him pronouns. My real job is I'm a teacher, which is why this is really important to me in my work. I always say this is kind of like my side hustle. It's all volunteer for me. I've been volunteering since 2003, so I'm finishing my 19th year volunteering with GLSEN, and I've been doing lots of safe schools types of work like this since then. I do trainings for GLSEN. I do trainings for the NEA, the National Education Association. I just really think it's important that students have access to safe spaces so they can learn, and that educators have access to resources to help provide education that supports all students, regardless of who they are. So that's just a little bit about me. So I look forward again to hearing some questions, answering some questions, and getting to know who's here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's an honor to have you here, and thank you for spending the evening with us. And then our last panel member is Jason Silverstein. Jason is 18 years old. He was born and raised in Issaquah, mixed race, Jewish, transgender, bisexual. So it is a great pleasure to have Jason joining us this evening. Jason, you want to say a few words to the group?
Yeah, hi. I'm Jason Silverstein. I was born in Seattle and raised in Issaquah. I use he, they pronouns. I'm 18 and I just finished high school at Nova High in the Central District in Seattle, but I did go to Issaquah schools up until the time I was 16. So, yeah. I moved schools from Issaquah. I attended Gibson Eck in Issaquah for 9th and 10th grade, and I moved schools from there to Nova in Seattle because I did not feel I was like academically supported there, and there was a lot of bigotry happening there, which was like affecting my personal my mental health and learning and just kind of everything. So that's why I left.
Thank you for being here, Jason.
Yeah,
Okay.
of course.
Thank you, panelists, for introducing yourselves, giving me a little bit of background about you personally and the tremendous work that you do. I'm going to start our Q&A, and I'm going to make sure I pause in between sections to allow questions coming from the audience. But just to get it started, the way we've structured our Q&A is to kind of look back at our history as an LGBTQI community. So we're going to start with reflecting on the past. I have a few questions about that. Think about what's happening currently and how it's impacting our community, and also start to think about, considering the past and what's happening currently, where are we headed? So from a future perspective. So we're going to structure this Q&A in that format. So let me start first with the past. And what I found interesting is oftentimes when I'm having discussions with folks and sharing a little bit about our history, people are often, I'm finding, need the education of our acronyms. So when we say LGBTQ, others are saying, you didn't hit all the letters right. It's now LGBTQIA. And then if you look at it further, other people have corrected me in conversation, and it's more than that. So I'm going to throw this out to Astro because he educated me when I was having a discussion with him about the acronyms that we use to describe our rainbow community. So again, let's remember that this is an opportunity for us to educate those who are listening in, and this is a great way to do that. So Astro, why don't you start by explaining all the letters that are used to describe our rainbow community?
Sure. So the full acronym is quite a mouthful. And I think with that understanding, most of us who are in positions of educating folks around what is often just, we tend to call it the queer community for short, because it's an easy way to create an umbrella term that incorporates all of the possible identities and orientations that are included within the full acronym. We typically encourage folks that if it's too much to start with, just knowing LGBTQ+ is satisfactory, because the plus symbol is an acknowledgement that there is more, while not having to continue to repeat 10 letters every time you want to acknowledge the full spectrum of the community. But for those of you who are interested in knowing the whole thing, it is 2S LGBTQ2IA+. So the 2S stands for two-spirited, which is an acknowledgement to Native American traditions and beliefs that acknowledge that in their traditions and their practices, that it is they embrace and to some degree revere folks from their communities who one could say possess both male and female energies within the one body, ergo the name two-spirited. So for instance, you might be assigned male at birth, but express what would typically be seen as feminine qualities. And then one would acknowledge you then as a two-spirited person if you come from the Native American community, of which that's part of my ethnic heritage as well. And then the L is for lesbian, the G is for gay, the B is for bisexual, the T is for transgender, which also includes non-binary individuals, by the way. So non-binary kind of falls under the spectrum of transgender. And then the Q and 2 go together. It stands for queer and questioning. Not everybody includes the 2, but that's like, if you really want to go expert level, that's the full thing. And then the I is for intersex, which is a community that is often forgotten when we think about the full queer spectrum. And then the A stands for asexual. And then the plus represents the fact that this is sort of a living acronym, that it can be added to as time progresses. We realize that as we have evolved in our awareness of identities and communities within the queer spectrum, that more continues to be added because the individual human experience is myriad in its intersectionalities. And one gets to sort of bring to the table new identities and awarenesses as we are able to kind of create language for that. And I will say that there is such a strong correlation between the importance of language used and the identities held, which is why I think it's so important to, when possible, understand people's pronouns and maybe understand how they identify. You will often see that those of us who are under the queer spectrum try to make an effort to include our pronouns in email correspondence, in our online communications. For instance, you'll see that Mitch has put his pronouns in. I was going to do mine, but I wasn't able to get it in before I logged in properly. That's probably the first place to start when acknowledging the different identities within that acronym. But the best thing you need to know, if you are sort of still novice at this, is just the LGBTQ+. That is more than satisfactory, I would say. And then from there, you can get comfortable over time with more.
Thank you, Astro. Mitch, you had a comment to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I really thank you for that really broad spectrum. I kind of wanted to mention one of the safest things to do is to actually mirror people's language that they use. I know in our older community, there are folks who are not comfortable with the word queer. And it was a term that kind of was brought up by a younger generation as they sort of took empowerment of a word that was used to batter, really, and as a slang term in the 50s and 60s. So there are a lot of people who maybe won't use that word in regards to themselves. So sometimes one of the best things to do is to kind of just mirror people's language and ask. And I really appreciate that big explanation. I learned some stuff, so that was great.
Same here. Same here. Thanks, Mitch. And before we leave this question, I'm very curious, Joe, with your work with the education and the youth community, has that been challenging to kind of get this on the radar as far as how we educate folks on the different groups that are part of our larger LGBTQ community?
What I find working with youth, a lot of the youth are pretty on board with the acronyms and the different identities and rainbows, et cetera, that exist in the community. Some of our challenges come with the adult educators and kind of starting with basics, like Asher was saying. So let's talk about what LGBTQ plus is as a basic and then kind of go from there. And so I agree with everything Asher was saying. But just starting with basics sometimes so that people have a basic understanding and then building on knowledge, I think is really important. But in my work, in my classroom, and in the work that we do with youth in the community, what I find is most of the youth in the community are pretty on top of the acronyms and the different identities and communities in the rainbow community. So that's my addition.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Great comment. Sticking with the past, from a larger perspective, when we think back to our history, our rainbow history, what were some of the defining moments that really stood out to you, that helped you maybe go the direction that was there something that happened in the past to you, or some major event that really drove you to be the advocate that you are today? I'm going to start. I honestly have to say that I'm a late bloomer with this. Something had to really rock my world to really help me to become more energized, involved in LGBTQ issues. And that was the result of finding and building the right relationship. So I mentioned my husband and raising our daughter. I think for us, it's very important to educate her in that way. So probably something had to happen to me. I wasn't out there joining a group to be advocates for the rainbow community. So really, it was relationship based for me, and from there, really understanding that our child had to be exposed to these types of topics to make her really understand our community. So that's where I come from. Astro, I'm going to throw this out to you. Was there something in historically that stood out to you that helped you go the direction you are and be the advocate that you are?
Well, looking at the broader historical picture, um, I think things that became very the struggle for the equity that we seek for the LGBTQ plus community requires commitment and effort and dedication. And to some degree, I'm kind of linking that overview perspective and my personal experience here. One of the reasons that I work at Lambert House, which I didn't give a full description earlier, but we work with LGBTQ plus youth in the Seattle and Puget Sound region from the ages of 10 to 22, providing support groups and both in-person and online events. We use several different platforms like Discord servers, Zoom sessions. We do pink proms, which is like an LGBTQ plus prom. We march in the parade. But my link to that and my desire to focus on LGBTQ youth, which is what I specialize in as a social worker, is lived experience. When I was in that age range, I was raised in Texas, which was an unfortunate time to be a queer person of color in a state like Texas. And I'm sure we're all aware of some of the laws and policies and attitudes that are rampant right now in the South. And so at that time, before there was even as much community organizing around our needs and issues as there is today, there was just a dearth of opportunity to find support. And many queer youth simply didn't have like literally a single supportive adult in their life. And we know that that is one of the strongest protective factors for an LGBTQ young person in order to successfully navigate their adolescent years through to their young adult years and go on to reach their potentials. We find that if that does not happen and we don't give them at least one supportive adult, they often go a different direction than one would hope. Oftentimes there are mental health challenges, substance use issues, homelessness, family rejection, religious persecution, etc. And I wanted to be a part of sort of being that protective factor for queer youth in a way that I did not get to receive, and knowing that that's available, I wanted to bring maybe my lens to that. And I also think that the intersectionality between people of color throughout LGBTQ plus history and the queer community itself is deeply entwined and not often recognized as much as it could be. And so I get to sort of hold both of those spaces concurrently.
Okay. Thank you. Jason, I'd like to ask you, growing up as a teen here in Issaquah, and are you finding that there's a need for more education as far as our LGBTQ plus community in the schools? You mentioned transferring schools. I don't know if that was a reason for that, but share some of your thoughts as far as how the education system functions today and where there could be room for improvement.
So I can't really speak for can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I can't really speak for like what it is as of right now, but as of 2 years ago, I left because I finished out my 10th grade year in 2020 and then switched to Nova in Seattle. Um throughout all throughout all of middle school and into high school, I had a rough time, to put it lightly, because at Issaquah Middle I was like relentlessly bullied and harassed for my physical appearance and my perceived queerness and my race, and the list goes on. And there was like maybe one or two teachers that were like openly supportive. Um, and because but I was faced with like just kind of relentless discrimination, and I did not feel like I could go to the school about it. And I know friends that faced similar things who had gone to the school about it just kind of had it waved off, like just brushed off. And at Gibson Ek that continued. It wasn't as bad, but I was still constantly misgendered and um like just mocked and mistreated by a lot of students there. And it wasn't everyone, and I still have friends from then that I met at Gibson Ek, except I just remember it was not an accepting environment, and there was a lot of racism and transphobia and just so much like kind of
Mm.
horrible stuff going on under the surface. And Gibson Ek really liked to present itself as diverse and inclusive, and I don't know exactly how the school has changed today, except I definitely remember from my time there, it was a chaotic environment with lots of staff turnover and discrimination. And kind of the last straw was there was an incident of anti-Semitism at the school that was not like really addressed at all by staff. And I was just like, yeah, I don't want to go to school, you know, to a school where people think it's acceptable to graffiti
Mm.
anti-Semitic hate speech in the bathrooms, and no one really did anything about it.
It sounds like you're happy where you are now. Is that a
Yeah,
fair statement? Good.
yeah, yeah. And so at Nova, I like there were still, normal high school problems, but I felt much more accepted, and it was more diverse, both in terms of like race and ethnicity and LGBTQ people there would, and so I felt, really accepted and grateful that I was able to finish my last 2 years of high school there.
It's great to hear. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
I deviated from the question. I want to give Mitch and Joe an opportunity to comment about something that happened in the past that really shaped what you're doing today, or maybe shaped you as an individual. Joe, can I throw that to you first?
Yeah, sure. It's funny because there's a lot of queer people on TV now, and it's something that we generally don't think about. Ellen's been on our screen for many, 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 many years. Was it 19 seasons that she just finished, or something like that? But something pivotal for me is remembering in 1996 or 1997 when Ellen had her show, Ellen, where there was this coming out episode that was so controversial that basically caused her to lose that show. And that people thought that was going to be the end of Ellen's career. And then of course she got picked up for her talk show, etc. But for me, like, I remember just being a high school student in 1996 or 97, whenever that happened, and just being just surprised like there was going to be this gay person on TV. And it was such a big deal. I remember it was on every magazine, like it was huge news. And so nowadays, like, I was telling some of my students about that recently, and they're like, what's the big deal? Because they're more exposed, even though there could be better representation. But back in the day when I was in high school in the 90s, there was no representation. And so just remembering like just a piece of that. And so in a lot of the work, and so that kind of influences the work that I do. A lot of the work that I do in my trainings is just talking about the importance of positive representations of queer people in history and events. And a lot of times we'll put our focuses on like negative things that happen, but like the importance of students seeing themselves in a positive light, and it's not all doom and gloom and they're all going to die of suicide or drug overdose. Because a lot of times when we talk about queer youth, we talk about the negative things that are associated with queer youth, that we don't talk about the amazing things that happen to queer youth. And so for me, that's a thing that I think about as I talk to educators, is like, well, what can we do to make sure that students see themselves in a positive light in all curriculum that we do? And so that Ellen fiasco or drama really brought to my brain the importance of making sure that all students should see themselves in school regardless of what the unit, lesson, curriculum is, that students should always see themselves and see their classmates too, like diversely represented in the things that are being taught or shown. So yeah, that was my, it sounds kind of corny, but it really did a lot to kind of make me think about how we talk about representation.
No, that's a great comment. I'm smiling because of how we've changed specifically around the media, starting with that groundbreaking episode. I have my daughter pointing me to shows today that I've never heard of, and and then I start watching them, and it just brings a big smile to my husband and I with these shows that we're getting exposed to, that our daughter knows more of us, because it's been quite a journey to get to where we are now, especially around the media. What about you, Mitch? Something stood out to you that you'd want to share from past?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm gonna somewhat show my age here. So the biggest, I grew up also as a youth and in through college years in Texas, in Austin, thankfully, but in Texas as well. And the biggest deal for me was in the early 80s, as we started learning about this disease that was only allowed to be called an epidemic, but was certainly a pandemic at the time, and it was AIDS. Started spreading throughout the country, and I was in college, and I worked with an organization. Was not necessarily out, so it's important to know that at that point I was a lesbian in Texas, so I did not fit into, the bigger the hair, the closer to God kind of thing. That was not my style. And I worked with the AIDS Project of Austin at that time to develop some training for volunteers so that we could do the work among folks who were needing help, who were sick and needed care that didn't really need medical attention. It really could be done by other people. We could learn how to change the sheets while someone was in them. We could learn how to transfer people. We could learn how to clean stents and do some of those things. And so it helped cut down the costs. It's important to note all those drag queens, and at the time called transsexuals, who were there at Stonewall at the very beginning, really kind of fighting that fight. And that sort of led to the, lesbian gay movement and feminism. And, I remember in college and slightly afterwards, leading Women Take Back the Night marches. So here, move ahead like 30 years, and I'm exploring, this new thing about finding out that it was possible to transition from female to male, and looking for history and looking for that history, and certainly a dearth, as Astro said, of people of color in that history. Oftentimes trans masculine folks are somewhat invisible in that history as well. And so just beginning to see those things happen, and how important it was to, oh my God, I'm pretty sure I saw somebody, or I read about this doctor who way early in the 1800s was a doctor and performed surgery, and no one happened to know that he was born female. So there's all kinds of things that are now coming to light thanks to educators who are finding the time and digging up those inferences. So those are the things that move me forward to right straight forward to the transgender, non-binary kind of movement. So yeah.
Thank you. Great story. Thank you for making such a personal connection to that question. Before I move to kind of our next topic, I wanted to pause. And Hannah, were there any questions from our guests that you can throw out to the panel to answer?
you so much, Ray. There are no current questions right now. Some positive comments though, just sharing sympathy and gratitude for all of you sharing these personal stories. I think it's really hitting home for many folks. So it's just encouraging, I think, even more stories to be shared. So yeah, keep it going. I appreciate it, Ray.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on to, I had mentioned we're breaking up the Q&A from past, and I'm going to move us to current. I don't know how to tee this one up. There's just a lot going up currently, right? That impacts not just our LGBTQ community, but others outside of our community. But I see that it has a connection to our rainbow community. With the current tragic events that have played out across our country the past few years, was there a connection that your organization made? It could be one that really resonated with you and you felt the need to translate that event, however tragic it was, to how you deliver the message as it relates to our LGBTQ plus community. And I'll just throw some examples out there. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the numerous Asian attacks that have happened in the East Coast, and of course the most recent tragic events in Uvalde, Texas. Events that you see has some sort of connection with how our rainbow community and our youth might be impacted by that today. Does that bring forward fear that the rainbow community could be next in some way? And the answer to that is yes, because of the one incident in Florida that happened back then. But I guess how is the current events today? I don't know if the right word is translated, but how is that shared so we give an opportunity to get feedback from the people that you serve? Mitch, I'm going to start with you with that one, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think one of the key elements to remember is that, and I'm sure that I'm thinking Astro might be able to key this up a little bit better, but in terms of our marginalized communities, it's helpful to remember that when we stand for each other, we stand for all of us. And you know, we look at the most, if there are levels, I mean, we look at people who are intersectional, who are multiracial, who are who may be immigrant, refugee, who may, you know, it's like these intersectional identities. And when we stand for any of us, we stand for all of us, and it just makes everything better. I think for me, and I'm going to get pretty current, but the recent legislation, or not really legislation, but how parents were vilified and criminalized for standing and supporting their transgender children as they looked at the transition journey that they might be taking, and having someone from an organization like VSHS, but it was whatever's in Texas, you know, making a decision about that was an abusive act by a parent. And that kind of thing is like, I can't even imagine that. And yet, you know, here we are also looking at putting legislation and taking control and thought away from the bodies of people because they decide that it's the most, you know, it's the best decision for them to be able to go forward with perhaps an abortion or some other kind of, you know, it's very scary to me. And I think that the more that I look at it, the better, the more I see it, the better I can react in terms of doing something, is to stand with all of these communities. And every time something's happening, making sure that I say it, that I give the mic to the to the people that need to say those words and to be able to stand with them through that.
Thank you. Thank you. Astro, anything to add to that?
I'm not sure if this fully aligns, but as you were sharing, Mitch, one of the things, so one of the most foundational components of my work is that I stand strongly against what is summed up by this big fancy word, factionalism, and the effect that that has on us as a society, as like a whole community. One of the things that I always like to say is that there is always a weapon that precedes violence, and it is like with an actual like a firearm, or you know, some of the things that we've witnessed around that with all of the shootings and killings. But that's always preceded by the dangers of violent conviction, especially when it is informed by fear mongering. And I think that there's been a lot of that going around, and fear mongering creates fear. And when people believe in that, whatever they've been told wholeheartedly, and they think that that threat needs to be nullified, where there was no threat, people react and take action. That's where this all starts. And when that fear mongering happens and creates these violent reactions, it creates the factionalism that's divisive, divides us from being a human race, and instead making these hierarchical assumptions based on fear of who is good and evil, who is worthy and unworthy, who needs to be wrangled or smothered or taken out, or whatever words or approaches you want to use. And so I've made one of the most foundational components of my mission to sort of tie the knots back together, like this unraveling, this factionalism that has happened, to get people to stop thinking of it as us versus them, because it is a very dangerous place to be, because then everyone who isn't exactly like you, who doesn't believe what you believe, becomes a threat, rather than just being another version of, as I stated earlier, the myriad of ways that a human can live, none of which are better or worse than any other, in my opinion, unless it does harm. And if doing harm becomes the righteous thing to do, then I question how we sort of got there and people's perception of what it is to be righteous. I'm a big believer that taking another human life, or just thinking that it doesn't deserve to exist alongside you, is the greatest form of evil, regardless of whom that is put upon, whether it's because of someone's race, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, orientation, gender identity, etc. None of that should take away a person's right to have equity and to live in the world in the way that they choose that isn't doing any harm. And so all of these things that we're seeing right now, regardless of which of those reasons it comes down to, it's based on that fear mongering and this factionalism, this sense of us versus them. And that's what I try to bring us back together. Like, lesbians and gay men should not be sort of pulling apart from each other and dividing up, because then we become weak. So really, as you said, Mitch, it comes down to unity and respect, and how precious life is, regardless of the package it comes in.
Wow. Absolutely. You know, I mentioned all those events, but the bottom line is respect and dignity. Like you said, it doesn't have to be just our community. It spans everybody. So yeah, I think you narrated it perfectly. It just can't be a topic here for this event. It needs to be one that captures the entirety of all groups. Sticking to current events, there's one that I wanted to ask of the group, but let me take a moment here to pause and just share for those, again, opportunity to educate. So Roe versus Wade is a looming topic that, for those of you, just for background, in 1973, there was a decision, this is 1973, decision made by the Supreme Court that entitled a woman to have an abortion during their first trimester. What is going on currently is there's a decision that might reverse that. So when we think about rights, dignity, choices, this touches on that so powerfully. And we look at that taking away from dignity and rights and applying that to different communities, ours being one of them, LGBTQ+, I'm sure it makes us very, very nervous. Has this topic, the Roe versus Wade issue that's going on right now, that's making headlines regularly, how has that played out in your communities? Have people come, or in your organizations, has that been something that people have wanted to discuss? Is there a nervous feeling that's going on? Again, with the youth population, maybe I can start with you. Joe, has this made people nervous? Guess people around you.
I mean, not specifically Roe v. Wade in this discussion, but the discussion of just rights in general. What I was going to mention in the last question that kind of connects with this is just looking at our rights just in general. Like one of the things that I work with or I deal with regularly is like book bans and removals and censorships, right? And like who decides who can do what, and this idea of the rights that we have can be taken away depending on who's on a Supreme Court or who's the president or whatnot. It really allows people to be engaged in the political process. And, you know, I know that gets really sensitive because like nothing's supposed to be political, but yet everything is political in our work. And like just being a queer person, sometimes I feel like that's just political in itself because you're constantly having defending different things about your life, like marriage or whatnot, right? And so, or, you know, even being an educator or, you know, if someone's a gay person or a queer person in education, you know, someone might look at them a little bit differently than a heterosexual person who is teaching. There's a bunch of other things. I think in general, when we look at our civil rights, you know, we think they're guaranteed, and that's not always the case. And so what I appreciate, even about this decision that's going to come down, however it comes down, is that it really is allowing people to engage in the process, specifically our youth. And I'm sure that Jason could talk a little bit more about this since I'm not a youth, but just in my work with youth, I'm finding that students are more engaged in what is going on in politics and in the media, and are trying to have their voices heard. So I think that's what I'll say about that.
Thank you, Joe. Jason, did Joe capture that right? Are you finding that your peers are more interested and more engaged? I would hope the answer is yes, but I hope does fear prevent them from being more engaged, given what's going on currently?
I would say a lot of um like my peers and, you know, other youth are pretty engaged in like kind of the current state of the world just because, you know, it's affecting us the most. And I mean, this is like with so many issues. And I mean, from like the, you know, 2020 protests to now. And I've definitely seen a lot of like kind of a lot of the start of outrage in social media about like the current like wave of anti-trans sentiment online, you know, like the people who were addressing that first were like me, like, and like, you know, my friends and, you know, other youth online, because there's like so much anti-trans sentiment, more than I have like ever seen, kind of. And um you know, so many uh older people in the community that, you know, aren't necessarily like, you know, 50 or 60, but just like, you know, 30 or 40, are saying, you know, this is like the most transphobia they've seen, like homophobia and transphobia they've seen publicly accepted in or just like referenced in media since like the 80s or 90s. And it's definitely really upsetting and discouraging to see like so much hate all the time. And like, you know, especially online. And, you know, like obviously I've been online since I was like 10. Or I mean like I started, you know, actually using the internet to like read about current events when I was like maybe 10 or so. Um, and you know, I'm pretty active on social media, and I like to, you know, just talk about stuff that's going on currently,
Yeah.
because it's important. And I've just seen like so much anti-trans hatred, and it's and like I think because of this, people are kind of realizing, yeah, we have to work together and not, kind of, segment into off of in segment off into all of our, little groups, the lesbians over here, the gay men over here, the trans women here. But we have to work together because
That's a great
without
point.
that we're not going to get anywhere. And because if, trans rights are rolled back, gay and lesbian rights will maybe rolled back,
Mhm.
and that, and then so on and so forth, and like kind of relating to Roe versus Wade, because if that's overturned, what other
Yeah,
Supreme Court decisions could be overturned? It's just
exactly.
kind of a snowball effect, and so that's why we need to work together and like stop this now, and
Yeah,
let people know that like in spite of all the horrible stuff happening, we're still happy, and we're still fighting, because like I think LGBTQ joy is like really important as well. And I've been to like Pride Month events this month, and in past years, and it's just like really important to
stick
you
together.
know be happy and not be dragged down by everything all the time, which is pretty hard and kind of, weird to think about, why would I want to be happy when there's all this horrible stuff happening in the world? But
Absolutely.
it's really important that we, still come together as a community and be like,
Yeah,
we all have different experiences, but we know like we have to work together to make sure that
great,
we're safe.
great point. Thank you, Jason. Mitch, you had a comment about this question topic?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but this is the first time in maybe in history where we may be talking about people who are having abortions and not women who are having abortions. I have a lot of my transgender men friends are having children of their own. And I don't think anyone's even that thought has crossed very many minds other than ours. And what are we going to get to when it is a point of a human right, not just a civil right, about who gets to choose, you know, a law that affects my body and who I am. So I I just wanted to throw that out just to kind of put a kink in everything. Um, but it's a really interesting time. And
Yeah,
I think in the same way, all the decisions that we're doing around Title IX and privileges or not for trans youth, and whether it's in sports events or other ones, it's a big deal right now. And Biden, I think, is working on that. So
yeah, yeah. If I could add a comment, I think what really makes me nervous about the potential reversal of Roe v. Wade is, again, going back to our rights, like marriage equality. I think about all those rights that took us, it was a journey to get to where we are now, whether it be having my husband on my insurance plan, or working with an organization to adopt as two gay men. Those things could be significantly more challenging, and we take it for granted. So I want to shed light into that again, this is we as a community look at this as a risk, an intrusion to our rights that could bloom into something that could impact our day-to-day lives. And it's quite frightening. It's my husband and I look at it that way. A pause again. Hannah, are there any questions from our audience, our participants, who we could address?
Thank you so much, Ray. Yes, I'd first like to share a comment from an audience member, and then I'd like to share a question. Our comment here in regards to this question is, when I think of governments and groups going against decisions made to support the rights of anyone, I always wonder which one might be next. Loving versus Virginia, Griswold versus Connecticut, Obergefell versus Hodges. Any of them can be put into danger when we set a precedent that we can take rights away. I think it's a good point there. Yes, snaps all around. And then, Ray, I would like to also present a question from an audience member. The comment started off with, great conversation, thank you. What can we learn from these sisters and the dysphoric prepubescent decisions they made? Think of the Curabelle case in particular that made global attention. Thank you for discussing my question. Is anybody familiar with this and able to speak on this topic?
I am. So Curabelle she is, I believe, from England. And she's widely known for being what is called a detransitioner, which is someone who transitioned at one point in their life and then reversed that decision, and um and detransition happens for a multitude of reasons, but um like something I'd like to like kind of point out is that no one is giving testosterone injections to 7-year-olds or whatever. Like, what happens, and at least in my personal experience, it is incredibly hard to get on hormones, like, through an actual doctor. And I have known a handful of people that have just DIY'd it, and um like ordered hormones somewhere online and just done it at home, which is unsafe. But that's what like but what pushes people to do that is because non-acceptance by like family, um and lack of access to like medical care and things like that. But so anyway, so what I'm kind of trying to make the point of is Curabelle's story is kind of not a universal experience for transition, like people who transition, because rates of like regret of transition are only about like 1 to 2%, and like most people who regret transitioning, it like they regret it solely because of lack of acceptance. Um and it's like, because I remember it took me 7 months to get like an appointment at the Seattle Children's Gender Clinic when I was like 14 or 15, I think. And at that point I had already been like aware I was trans and out in some capacity, not always to my parents, but like out in some capacity to friends or classmates since I was 12. And so I'm coming up like, yeah, so I'm like, it's been about 6 years of me for being being out as trans. And it is not like, you don't just really decide to transition overnight. Like, it is a long process that changes a lot. And um my my view of myself is different from when I was 12 and 14 and 16, and even last year. And the best thing to you know support a friend who, or just someone in your life who's struggling with gender, whether that is transitioning or detransitioning or like anything, kind of, is to just be there for them. um I've kind of gotten away from the question about
No,
Curabelle, but yeah.
thank you for educating us, because I didn't know what that was. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's like brought up in like a lot as a point by anti-trans activists, and being like, look at what they did to her. Um and using her case as a reason to not only roll back trans rights in the UK, which are also under a huge attack similar to the US, but like also the US and Canada. And it's, and definitely, you know, like, again, it's important to, you know, hear others' perspective on their gender, except it is not, you know, it's not okay to platform transphobes, is what I'm kind of trying to get at. So
Yeah, there's so much complexity behind that, Jason. Thank you. There's a great question
yeah.
that was thrown at us of the panel as it relates to this topic, and I encourage any of our panelists here to answer it. But an audience member is asking, what can we learn from the dysphoric pubescent decisions that are being made that impact us? What can we learn from this? Esther, you want to chime in on that one?
Well, as Jason said, I think so clearly, and Jason, I love what you shared. Thank you. Being transgender, like anything else, is a very personal experience, and it's not universal. And unfortunately, what has been happening is anyone can find one anomaly and duplicate it over and over and over again for personal gain or political agenda. One of the things I say to anybody who's ever taken statistics is the point of that course, at least for me and the work that I do, is to understand that the same set of numbers, the same research can be used by both sides. I can find data in a set of data that I can use for my interests, and someone who would maybe view me as the enemy, the opposition, can also find data in there that they can spin, skew, etc. And so unfortunately what happens here is we have a person who has had a light shined on them that's been made to be the poster child for something, and it's just not true. And I think that for me, that's the lesson, is that when we are talking about the experiences of someone like this who has been put in the limelight, don't generalize it. Don't start making assumptions just because one person has been showcased. You've got to understand the complexity, as you said, Ray, of these experiences. Go in with a little bit of speculation about anything that isn't scientifically based. If it's coming from a place of opinion or a party that is known for fear-mongering, etc., be very careful to let what they're pressing onto you sit with any semblance of truth in your mind. Go do your homework. Listen to both sides, make your own decisions. I think that's one of the best things we can do, instead of just taking something as truth because it comes from somebody in the public eye.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous.
I love that. I love that. Don't let our emotions direct us, right? Give it some thought, give it some
Yeah.
analysis and understanding, and that would really support what we're trying to get across. That's a great recommendation, Astro. Mitch, you have
Yeah.
a comment?
And
Oh, go ahead.
like I'm friends with people who have like both detransitioned and retransitioned, and you know, a lot of it, like, and there's like a very you know, a wide range of why people transition and detransition too. And kind of, you know, the top two reasons were, you know, they just they had not fully figured themselves out yet. And a lack of support from friends and family, like I said earlier. And you know, with these cases, like my friends, you know, they did what was right for them at the time, and you know, that can change throughout your life. So again, you know, you have to look at it from all angles.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Mitch?
The thing I wanted to add was that a lot of times, at least this Texas case was talking about, actually, they kept calling them hormones, but we don't give hormones to youth. They're hormone blockers. And what it does is it allows people and families the choice and the ability to take time to explore those decisions. And for some, an extra amount of time before starting on or making a choice to medically transition through hormones is what people need. And it's interesting, Jason, to hear that it is somewhat as daunting as it has always been to transition. It took me more than a year to get a therapist who would evaluate me to write the letter that would allow me to go look for a doctor and spend another year looking for a doctor who would work with me. So it's like there's all these kinds of layers, and there used to be a whole series of rules that you had to do. You had to live as the person that you were going to become without the use of hormones for an entire year before you were given hormones. So imagine what that is really like, to tell a man that as he's making changes that he can, that he is not going to be given any hormones, but has to live as a woman for an entire year. So I think it's important to understand kind of how this is, and there are so many more steps and so much more that people have to, and hoops that you have to jump through in order to make this. And it is a difficult journey, and it is long, and it does take a lot to go through. It's not one of these snap decisions. So that's what I wanted to add.
Great ad, Mitch. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to kind of segue us into our last topic about thinking about the future and our community and the path that we're going. But before I do that, Hannah, are there any other questions that we might want to answer from the audience? Capture them all.
Thank you, Ray. I think we have a really good question here that I'd like to save it for our last one, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's the only question we have on queue right now. So if anybody else
Okay.
has any questions, please feel free to message me in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So we talked about the past, great conversation. We talked about the challenges of what's occurring currently, and certainly as we look at what's going on currently, there's more challenges than there are positive advances. But with that said, as we look to the future, I want you to look at this in the light of your organization and what is it that you can share with our audience to educate us to maybe better be connected with the work that you do in your organization, and how we can be better engaged. And I do want to share that after this, there's a message that's going to go out to everybody who's participated to ensure that they're connected to your websites so they can learn more about you. But let's think about the future. What is it that concerns you and your organization? What are the challenges, and what are the positive thoughts that are also occurring? So I know there's a lot of challenges, but something that you can share from a positive light as we kind of wrap up here. Joe, may I start with you with GLSEN?
Oh yeah, of course. I always think as long as there's schools, that there's always going to be work to do in supporting students and educators. So for us, it's always going to be working on perfecting our craft and giving educators the resources that they need, no matter what the grade level is. From pre-K through 12th grade, there's lots of different resources for curriculum, lessons that are inclusive. And everything's age appropriate and developed for different age levels in mind, and just thinking about like what different people need at different grade levels. And so for us, we're always happy to do the work. One of the resources that's on our website is something called the Rainbow Library, and so for educators or families in the community, school libraries can request a box of books for grade levels that are LGBTQ inclusive, that are age appropriate. We have them, I think, split up in K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, with books that are centered on LGBTQ characters, and specifically a lot of authors or characters in the book who are students of color. And the students need to find representation in everything that they do. And so I'm always going to pitch, like, we're always looking for donations so we can make sure that all the schools in the state can have boxes of books. I think we've sent out over 550 boxes of books to schools all around the state. And so I'm always going to make a plug for that. Go to our website. It's an average about $135 a box to each school, so that students can get resources where they can see people like them in their curriculum, or at least in their school libraries. And then working with educators, I'm always going to plug that educators, administrators can email us and set up trainings, and we could do some trainings on how to make schools more inclusive for LGBTQ plus students and educators. So there's a lot of work to do, and not just necessarily, we don't just work with schools and with students, we also work with education associations, unions, etc., to make sure that everyone's getting what they need. So for us, the challenge is always going to be, there's always people who are going to be against inclusive curriculum, inclusive sex ed, inclusive libraries. And that one of the things that we're always going to continue is kind of push back on that, and talk about how one person shouldn't dictate what everybody else should learn or what everyone else should get, that families and communities make the decisions. Schools should be representative of everyone that goes into that school, and that no one should be excluded just because someone has a differing opinion. Like the wonderful rainbow that exists in our communities should be inside the school as well. I always say that curriculum should be windows and mirrors, and GLSEN has a philosophy of that as well. Whereas, like, I should be able to look out a window and see everyone in my school like reflected there, but I should also look in a mirror and be able to see myself in those resources as well. And so that's always what we're going to promote for schools and for students, to make sure that students get what they need and the educators have the resources to teach it. So that's for us. That's for the future. I think there's always great things. We have a lot of great programming. I'm also going to plug our Shine Student Leadership Team, where students can join our youth council. And then, of course, we have lots of resources on our website for educators and students.
I think back to when I was at that age and how amazing it would have been to have a resource like GLSEN to come to my school and understand your vision and your values, and to be able to speak face to face with students and having them walk out of the back of the crowd and say, hey, I want to learn more, right? We did not have that. So a great light to shine to what's going on currently and the direction that where we are currently and the direction that we're going. So thank you. Thank you, Jill. Astro, the work that you're doing in your organization, what are some of the focuses as it relates to the future that you'd be willing to share with us in the audience?
So one of the things that kind of makes us great at Lambert House is, again, when we have young people wherever they are in community that don't have access to supportive systems at home, at school, etc., much like what Jason's story was like in the past, we are available through the power of the interweb, which is something that sort of sits in my mind when I think about the fact that I'm specifically working with young people who were raised on the internet. And you used the word resources, Ray. The internet is a resource. And there are many other types of resources that have been where the amount and types of the kinds of resources that we would like to see people getting into their hands has expanded. There are more community organizations than there have ever been doing the kinds of work that we are passionate about and fight for. All you have to do is find them. They are there. There was once a time when if it wasn't right in your neck of the woods, you never heard about it or knew about it. Now you're just a few keystrokes away from getting the answers and the support that you need from somewhere. And the other way that I see that showing up, when I think about my kids and their future and what they're doing, it brings me to the same answer. They are beginning to use the power of social media and organizing community digitally in ways I've never seen before. And that is giving them such a level of reach and community. They can be so much more expansive and far-reaching than was ever possible. And because they're so savvy with it, that's sort of become their vehicle for change. And I get to, as Jason spoke to this earlier, that they as well are quite active on social media, and I see that with every young person I work with. And they're not just going on there to like watch cartoons. They're going on there and actively engaging in community, and they're becoming digital activists. And I find that to be so smart and inspiring. You know, we're now at the point where if you want to be a part of a particular community organization or some type of community organizing, this is how we communicate those things to one another now. So if you want to be a part of a protest against Roe versus Wade, or against, you know, or I should say for Black Lives Matter, for, you know, trans youth rights in sports, there are organizations that are organizing this stuff online in your community. They are so easy to find. So don't sit back thinking that you're powerless and you don't know how to access or who to support. just go use the power of the internet, and it'll tell you what's out there. And then you get to use your own wise mind to decide whom to align with and how you can support them. You want to make donations, you don't have to send a check anymore. You can pay somebody through Instagram now, like, and it really is sort of a boon, I think, for the future. And one of the things we've learned through the pandemic is how to pivot toward a digital world and use that to our advantage. And I think that that's going to stay, especially with the young people who are taking over the world. And that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that's one of the greatest resources that they are able to manipulate.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful comments. Mitch, I saved you for
And
the
as far as my personal organization, we are able to access rural youth in ways we never could. So we have kids that can't get to Lambert House, but they can show up to a Zoom meeting. And that is great because it allows them to, especially if they're in an unsupportive house, they can put headphones in, go into their bedroom and join us and sort of have a bit of some protection and some separation so that they're not going to get, caught finding the support that they need. And that has been beautiful to watch. Like, we have kids now that join Lambert House that live in Indonesia and Saudi Arabia and Australia and China, and they found us online and they join us at all times of day or night to come do groups and have support and get resources from us. And we've been able to do some really cool work with them for that. I just wanted to throw that out because that's one of the most meaningful parts of that.
That's fantastic. Wow. International flair. Mitch, just to wrap us up here, because I have one last question before we wrap up, but I was thinking about our, I'm not going to say our age group or demographics, but sometimes for this, we often get lazy in the rainbow community of our age. I would say, let's just say 50s and 60s, because we're relaxed in our lives. There's nothing to really rock our world. We're not as engaged as the other generations are. Maybe we just got a little sedentary there. What are what's going on within Gen Pride that you feel is worthy to share here in just a couple minutes?
Well, I have to say that's not exactly our pattern. We're not sitting back at all. In fact, part of the organization, the biggest part of what we're doing besides, well, all the work is we're supporting, along with 9 other organizations that are LGBTQIA plus in the community, an LGBTQ affirming elder housing, and it's right on Broadway. And we are in the process, we being Gen Pride is the point of contact for this consortium of people under the work of Community Roots Housing and the Rise Project. So we're raising the money. It's now. And the one thing I wanted to say that I think is the biggest deal for seniors, our biggest issues are isolation and invisibility. So we're out there lonely because we're not finding each other. And what we need is intergenerational work. So we need the digital folks to tie us together. Gen Pride 2 years ago, I was hired, and all of our programs went on, all the training went on online, and all the programs have been going on online. And we have experienced finding seniors for the first time and elders who could navigate. And if they can't, we help them navigate, and we get them materials or tablets so that they can get to us and get online. And I think this intergenerational thing that we could create, Astro, going back to your first thing about connection being a whole thing, it being a human experience for us. And if we can put those things together, we use our digital folks who are digital natives, and be able to educate some of our elders and capture these stories that are incredible. It's that kind of thing that's going to move us forward.
Fantastic. Great answer. Okay, I'm going to wrap us up here. We have about 5 minutes, and one last question. And I think I'm going to kind of answer this, but also look to you guys for last comments. We're wondering here in our community, Issaquah, sometimes we feel removed from Seattle and the challenges that are going on there because we're comfortable here in our community. What can we do? What are the things that we can do that could make our topics that we've discussed more visible here in Issaquah, to make our community more comfortable for all of us? To tee this off, that's why we established the Equity Board. That's why we have, especially, there's so much going on here in the month of June with Juneteenth and so many ways to celebrate and remind the community of the different topics that are important to us. But is there anything that stands out to you as far as how be as specific as you can? Don't know how much you know about our city, but again, me sitting on the Equity Board, I might, in fact, like bring each of you as a panelist to speak for 30 minutes with the rest of the board and share some of the great work that you do. But very quickly here, last 3 minutes or so, I'm going to start with each of you and give you about 1 minute. So, Joe, real quick, think about the city of Issaquah. What is it that we can do to be proactive and keep these topics top of mind?
I mean, for my organization, it's making sure the city is connecting with the school district or the school districts that the city has got the boundaries around that. When I moved, because I came from Idaho, when I moved here, I was very surprised how the school boundaries and the city boundaries don't match. It's so strange. But whatever school boundaries the city of Issaquah touches is being in connection with those school districts, and then figuring out how the school districts can work with the city so that we can do some of these trainings, and even getting city folks involved in some of these safe space trainings so that we can figure out how we can do those similar types of trainings so that the places that the city owns are safe for everyone too, regardless of their sexual orientation, and making sure that we have like safe space stickers or rainbow stickers or everyone included stickers everywhere, so that at least for the places that the city owns, so that we know that we're a safe environment for everyone. That's what I would do if I ruled the world.
Great advice. Thank you. Astro?
I would mostly reiterate what Joe just shared. Like, I think that it really comes down to connecting with other organizations that do this work, that are experienced, respected, that work from evidence-based practices and research that can guide you forward based on what we know and support you in getting where you would like to be, whatever your goals and outcomes are to that end. They have probably done this kind of work with several other cities, communities, organizations, etc., and they can help you realize the vision, the hope that you have within this, whether it's creating organization-wide maybe mandatory trainings, things of that nature are often quite additive to that forward, like, progressive thinking perspective. Yeah, just reach out, see who does this, who does it well, or ask other folks who have needed this and succeeded. Because again, community doesn't just exist between individuals or identities, it's also organizations. I think organizations should create community within their community so that they're bolstered by one another and sort of create a network that doesn't get cut off and just stop somewhere because someone doesn't know what to plug into next. You just keep that kind of chain going until everyone's had an opportunity to get connected to all of the different kinds of resources that are available to assist you.
Thank you. Great topic. Mitch, wraps up here.
And in this last minute, I'll say I'm not sure if being comfortable is part of that equation. So when we talk about, I talk about allies and accomplices. And I think the difference between an ally and an accomplice is this action step that you take as an ally, going further, that to directly confront injustice, willing to have your own personal comfort disrupted in the process, possibly be schooled and have to learn something, and just working in partnership with other organizations to learn the things that you need to do, taking responsibility for educating yourself, taking and being accountable for that, and making steps to move forward in that. And I will share with Hannah a great video that YouTube that she can share, the 5 tips for being an ally. So I'll share that with Hannah. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds wonderful. Thank you. Well, we were right at 8 o'clock. And first and foremost, I just want to say how much of an honor it's been to be your host and be able to throw these questions out at you. I know I speak for myself and the mayor and the city board, specifically the equity board. that this has been of tremendous value to us and our community. We will stay well connected with you. Gosh, it's going to be hard to top this panel for next year if we decide to do this again. I'd love to maybe have an opportunity to do it in person, but thank you for your time to both our panelists and to our audience. Happy Pride to everybody. I hope you all have this good time to celebrate this weekend. I know I'm going to be out there at the celebrations in Seattle, and I hope to maybe run into you guys. If not, I'll be reaching out to each of you because I want some one-on-one time with you, which I didn't get in person, but I look forward to that. Have a wonderful evening. Again, many thanks to you, and we will stay connected.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.